Well, hello everyone and welcome. If you are new to this channel, please do not forget to like and subscribe. If you are a returning visitor, please do not forget to like and subscribe. If you are a subscriber, please do not forget to like the video if you enjoy it. This gives me adequate feedback in order to determine what type of content people who are viewing this channel want to see, and I will adjust accordingly based on the feedback that I get. So please do not forget to either like or subscribe to either to this channel or to this video. With that out of the way, let me talk about the purpose of this video. This video is all about Mercury. Why Mercury, you ask? Well, Mercury is a planet that I feel do not get enough attention. That's for a couple of reasons. It is pretty difficult to observe, and it doesn't really have a lot of features that get people to want to observe it, as opposed to some of the other more popular planets that people like to observe, such as Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, and Venus. Each of those planets has something relatively unique about them, or they're pretty accessible when it comes to finding them and observing them, that get people to want to observe those planets, as opposed to Mercury, which doesn't really have a lot of observable features and it's pretty difficult to observe. I want to change that. Mercury is a wonderful, fascinating planet, and you will not be disappointed by learning more about this planet and wanting to actually observe this planet. Plus, it's a challenge to observe this planet, and being able to do that will give you some type of accomplishment, as I was able to do when I was finally able to observe Mercury. Well, let's start from the beginning. Before I go into the details about the planet, let's talk about the history of Mercury. Mercury and all the planets are named after the Roman gods. More specifically, in Mercury's case, it is named after the Roman god Mercurius. And that particular god's role was basically the messenger of the gods, the mediator between humans and the gods. And this god was particularly very fast. And you have that's part of the job description. And this is shown in Mercury because it has the fastest orbit in the solar system. 87.97 Earth days that it takes for it to go around the sun. But before I go further down that rabbit hole, let's go back into some history. Mercury, while it's officially named after the Roman gods, that and all the observable planets have been known by many different names in many different cultures. So I don't want to give the impression that Mercury has only been observed by the Greeks and the Romans. Planets have been observed by many different cultures all over this world, and also go by many different names. So you have, it's sometimes known as the water star, it's sometimes known as the hour star. It's been observed by ancient Greece, ancient Egypt, ancient China, all over the world. In fact, the first known recording of Mercury being observed was done by the Assyrian Empire back in the 14th century. So the observation of Mercury has been going on for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. Now that's the history of it. Now let's talk about the science of it. As I mentioned previously, Mercury has the fastest orbit in the solar system with 87.97 days. It has a lot of the functions of other planets. It has a magnetic field. It is able to, it has its basically own orbit. What it doesn't have is satellites, so it doesn't have any moons. But that is pretty normal because Venus also doesn't have any known satellites. It has no atmosphere. But what's interesting about Mercury is that its day is longer than its year. What do I mean by that? Well, as I mentioned previously, Mercury has the fastest orbit in the solar system, so 87.97 days. Its day, the rotation about its own axis, goes much, much slower. So a solar day, which basically means for the sun's position to reach the same point in the sky, takes much longer. It takes actually 175 Earth days for a solar day to occur. Why is that the case? Well, if you were on Mercury, imagine you're on the surface. Now it doesn't get pretty hot. You're on the surface, and what you will see is sometimes the sun will be going in one direction, and then at a certain point it will stop, and then it will reverse itself and go in the opposite direction. And it will do that a few times until finally it begins its descent below the horizon and the cycle will repeat because it's going extremely fast around the sun, but its own orbit is amazingly slow. Another interesting feature that Mercury has is that it is smaller than some moons. The Jupiter moon Ganymede and Saturn's moon Titan are larger than the planet Mercury. It does have similar features as the moon, but what that provides is that while it is close to the sun, well, relatively speaking, it's close to the sun, and it doesn't have an atmosphere, that helps create a extremely high surface temperature. But the craters provide some shade, basically, and therefore it can be cooler in the craters, which means, and not to forget that there is the opposite side that isn't facing the sun. That means that the surface temperature of Mercury can range from 100 to 700 Kelvin. That that calculates minus 280 to 800 degrees Fahrenheit. Yes, it does have that range. It is also an inferior planet. Now, what do I mean by inferior planet? As you go into astronomy, or if you already know astronomy, you will realize or learn that a lot of the measurements in astronomy use Earth as a basis. And therefore, the inferior planets are the planets that come before Earth. So, Venus, Mercury are inferior planets. And what that means is that, well, those planets go through phases when observed from Earth. So imagine you see the moon. The moon goes through phases. You have a full moon, new moon, crescent moons, waning gibbous, waking gibbous. Well, Mercury and Venus, when observed, go through the same thing. There's basically the full Mercury. There's a new Mercury, which means it's behind the sun and you can't see it. If you observe it at certain points, it will be a crescent Mercury. It will be a waking gibbous, a waning gibbous Mercury. And those are fascinating to observe. Now, what is interesting about Mercury is that it is pretty difficult to observe. It is close to the relatively, I keep saying relatively speaking because Mercury is close to the sun, but it is still millions of miles away from the sun. But because it is the closest to the sun, its orbit is tied to the location of the sun. And therefore, you can't see it because the light of the sun basically washes Mercury out. And you won't be able to see it like during the day. And you can't see it at night because the sun is below the horizon. But there are 3 moments in which you can see Mercury. They are at twilight in the morning, twilight in the evening, and during a solar eclipse. Because that's when the moon covers the sun, its light no longer is as bright, and at that moment you can also observe Mercury. Now that's not a good time to observe it because most solar eclipses last only a few seconds to a few minutes, and therefore if you try to observe it, you're playing with damaging your eyes, because the solar eclipse is the only time you can observe the sun without any type of aid. But because they last so short, you should be focused on the solar eclipse and not necessarily trying to look at the planets. Now, I should also mention that Mercury is, as I mentioned previously, is difficult to observe. And that translates to the fact that so far only two satellites have reached the planet, with a third on the way. Hopefully it'll be there by 2024 or 2025. The reason for that is Mercury and Earth are going at different speeds, and it's difficult to get a satellite into the orbit of Mercury. It's pretty difficult to do so. I'm not going to go into the math or the science behind it, but it's pretty difficult to do so. But it has been done, and those satellites have been able to provide wonderful images of Mercury and wonderful science of Mercury. That the fact that there might be water in the craters, the fact that it has a magnetic field, the fact that while it doesn't have an atmosphere, its rotation is slower than its orbit. All those type of things have been provided by the information we were able to gain by observing such a planet. And so therefore, I hope this video has got you interested in Mercury and learned some things about the closest planet in the solar system to the sun, so that you would want to go out and observe. It can be difficult to observe because you have to catch twilight either in both the morning or the evening if it is able to be observed in a particular time of year. But you will be pleasantly surprised when you're able to finally see Mercury and know all the wonderful information behind Mercury. I hope you have enjoyed this video. As I mentioned previously, please not forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you again.